Welcome to another episode of The Legal Lowdown. I am your host, Matthew R. Carpenter, an attorney, and today we are taking a look at some pretty complex legal and political controversies swirling around Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro. My mission is to extract the key insights from the sources, help you understand the really significant accusations he's facing and how they connect. What they might mean particularly for Trump, who has expressed support for Bolsonaro, and what this all means for America. Now, before I dive into the details, the simple facts are this. President Trump has imposed massive tariffs on Brazil that will go into effect later this year. Although Trump claims these tariffs are because Brazil is not a reciprocal trade partner with the U.S., the truth is that Brazil has always operated at a substantial trade deficit with the U.S., meaning it sends far more money to the U.S. than it receives. This, in addition to social media posts from Trump that were published pretty close to when the tariffs were announced, has led many people to believe that the tariffs are really a method of retaliating against Brazil for prosecuting former President Bolsonaro, who is arguably one of Trump's greatest supporters in the Western Hemisphere. Trump's support for Bolsonaro is staggering for a few reasons. For one, Bolsonaro is accused of orchestrating a coup that mirrored in many ways the events that led up to the American January 6 riots. In addition to that, Bolsonaro is a verified racist and has also been accused of downplaying the importance of COVID-19 vaccines in Brazil, all while concealing that he received one of his own. And with that, I think we are ready to dive into the details. As I just mentioned, President Trump threatened to slap Brazil with substantial tariffs in the amount of 50% that will go into effect later this year. Trump stated that these tariffs are due because America's trade partnership with Brazil is far from reciprocal. Some critics question whether this is the actual reason, since Brazil, unlike China, has always operated at a trade deficit with the United States, meaning they send far more money to the United States than they receive. Almost $7 billion a year, amid a number of social media posts criticizing Brazil for its treatment of former Brazilian President Bolsonaro. Many commentators believe the tariffs are being weaponized to punish Brazil for prosecuting the former president, who has proved to be one of Trump's biggest supporters. This is interesting because President Bolsonaro has a complicated history in Brazil. As a congressman, he engaged in openly racist and sexist rhetoric. In a speech that you can find online just about anywhere, the former president said, quote, "Afro-Brazilians get nothing done. I think they aren't good even for breeding anymore." President Bolsonaro also told a white presenting female reporter, quote, "I wouldn't ever rape you because you're not worthy of it." Uninhibited by the fallout of his extreme rhetoric, Bolsonaro remained committed to serving in Congress, which he did for 7 terms. But while holding office, the controversy surrounding him never stopped. He openly stated again in videos you can find online that he's pro-torture. He also kept the portraits of several former Brazilian dictators in his office, which you can find again online. This affinity for Brazilian dictators was not surprising to some, since Bolsonaro served as a military officer under a Brazilian dictatorial regime. After all, Bolsonaro was born in 1955, and Brazil's dictatorial rule didn't end until 1985 when he was only 30 years old. But despite the backlash Bolsonaro received for his extreme views and statements, he still managed to win Brazil's presidential election in 2018, taking roughly 55% of the vote. Of course, this is due to the fact that Brazil was once considered one of the most dangerous countries in the world, and Bolsonaro capitalized on that by strategically presenting himself as the solution. You see, in 2016, 2 years before the presidential election that he won, Brazil's homicide rate was nearly 6 times that of the United States. Because Brazil shares borders with some of the largest cocaine-producing countries in the world, Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, the cool places, Brazil suffered as a key turf for drug cartel wars. Viewing Bolsonaro as a strong figure capable of resolving this problem, Brazilians actively supported his presidential campaign. Oh yeah, and it didn't hurt that many of the Brazilian political leaders in power at that time, who belonged to the opposing party, have been accused of, and in some cases convicted of, engaging in massive money laundering schemes that stole billions from Brazilian taxpayers. But as you may have guessed, the controversies didn't stop once Bolsonaro assumed presidential office. He came under fire during COVID-19, where he reportedly downplayed the severity and risk of the virus, all while maintaining his status as the leader of the country. At the same time, Bolsonaro vowed never to get a COVID-19 vaccine. It was discovered later on in 2021 that he actually did receive one, or so his medical records said. 3 years later, in 2024, a Brazil attorney general began considering healthcare fraud charges against the former president because the medical records indicated that he was vaccinated in Sao Paulo in 2021, but other official records suggested that he was nowhere near the city at that time, leading some to conclude that he actually forged the medical records so that he could gain access to countries that required you to have a COVID-19 vaccine. Along with those issues, the Brazilian Supreme Court also investigated Bolsonaro for allegedly firing a federal police chief to protect his son from corruption charges. And another inquiry also looked into a disinformation campaign that allegedly helped Bolsonaro get elected in 2018. And perhaps most concerning of all, Bolsonaro has been accused of orchestrating a coup to remain in power after he lost the 2022 presidential election. Similar to what many of us observed on January 6, where extremists stormed America's capital, back in 2022, President Bolsonaro claimed that he lost the election due to fraud perpetuated by compromised or faulty voting machines. Brazilian investigators say these comments, which were offered without evidence, spurred a wave of extreme protests that resulted in Bolsonaro's supporters storming Brazil's congressional buildings, its Supreme Court building, and its presidential palace. Brazilian investigators believe this was part of Bolsonaro's plan to stage a coup. The police claim that Bolsonaro and his allies first worked systematically to sow distrust, by claiming fake news, and then they targeted the electoral system specifically. This supposedly created the groundwork for the public discontent to support the coup. Of course, Bolsonaro denied these allegations, but it didn't help his case when Brazilian police searched the home of his justice minister and found a written document outlining a coup strategy that would have kept Bolsonaro in power. My goodness gracious, the document proposed that Bolsonaro's administration could put into effect an emergency measure known as the state of defense that would have allowed Bolsonaro to implement basically martial law and overturn the results of the election. An article written by the Associated Press reported that the document was circulated to military commanders. The AP article goes on to say that among military officials, the Navy commanders were ready to comply with the decree, but the Army and the Air Force leaders objected to any plan that would prevent the inauguration of the new president that defeated Bolsonaro. Those refusals are reportedly why the plan to overturn the election didn't go through, according to witnesses who spoke to investigators at least. So, honestly, just zooming out from all of that, because that was a lot. That was a lot, Bolsonaro, if that's true. Just having a draft like that, right, outside of any real crisis really suggests something. It goes far beyond political disagreement, maybe even heading towards autocratic actions. Police are alleging that this was a key step in a sort of multi-pronged coup plot. This is a staggering series of allegations, just jarring stuff, like left jabs from former Brazilian UFC champion Alex Pereira. Oh, and as part of these investigations, Bolsonaro actually had to surrender his passport in February 2024. Plus, he's banned from running for office for 8 years. And what exactly led to that ban, you might ask? Well, it came directly from Brazil's Superior Electoral Court. They found him guilty of abusing his political power, specifically by spreading disinformation about the electronic voting systems during his 2022 re-election campaign. So, there you have it. A short summary explaining why the Bolsonaro situation is so complex and controversial. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Feel free to leave them in the comments. And thank you for listening to this episode of The Legal Lowdown.